And today I'm super excited to introduce one of them, Caroline Higley. I'm especially excited because I remember Caroline being one of the first students I met when I started in my role in environmental studies about 10 years ago. And she majored with a degree in environmental studies and psychology. And when I think about Caroline, I remember her passionately talking about, in this particular case, an internship she had done in the town of Meredith, New Hampshire. And I remember the act of talking to her, but I couldn't remember the details. So I decided to go back to the reflection she was supposed to write about the internship. And, clearly it was a transformative experience for her. And um, as I and it clearly was also a preview of what was to come. And not only she got her maybe first real world taste of what working in policy was like, but also she gained a lot of concrete skills. And as she put it, I really like this. So sorry, I'm going to quote you. She learned how to learn and how and when to pose questions. And in fact, she ended up asking a lot of questions. She mentioned she conducted over 20 informational interviews. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because I know many students are here today, and I want to underscore the importance of internships in exploring your interest early on, but also to learn new skills and also to broaden your network, which clearly I think was a preview of what happened next. Not surprisingly, right after she graduated, she landed a job at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where she started as a financial analyst. And she rapidly and successfully climbed the career ladder, holding different policy and financial positions. And about 4 years ago, she joined her current office, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, first as a director of environmental policy coordination, then as an assistant secretary, and culminating in her current role as chief financial officer, in which she oversees over a $1 billion with a B dollar budget dedicated to implementing environmental initiatives across the different state agencies. So today she will be taking us behind the scenes and showing us how to make things happen. Thank you and welcome back to campus.
Hello, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. My name is Caroline Higley, and I am the CFO of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. I'm really excited to talk to all of you today about managing the budget for EEA. I graduated from Tufts in 2016, but it feels like just yesterday that I was seated in this room eating pizza, importantly, and with the same environmental studies program leadership, and hoping that I might someday have a job just as cool as the speaker at the front of the room. Huge thank you to Dr. Oriens and Dr. Gomez for inviting me back to campus. It's really exciting to be here in front of all of you today, having come full circle. Hopefully, I can convince all of you successfully that I have a cool job now too. So in terms of some quick personal background, just wanted to share a little bit about my career path so far. At Tufts, I was an environmental studies and psychology major, in which I really liked the interdisciplinary nature of the coursework. I could never pick one topic on which to focus during my time, so I knew from a pretty early point that I was destined to be a generalist versus a specialist in the weeds in certain subjects. I also knew that I really enjoyed putting my soft skills to work, managing projects, managing relationships, and organizing on campus. I was one of those students who really liked group projects, and I really liked my work with student activities groups on campus, including the Tufts Senate, in which I was a member of the allocations board. Other than that, reinforced by an environmental internship in local government, as mentioned, and a solar company internship, I knew I wanted to stay in the energy and environment sphere. So those were basically the three things I really for sure knew about myself upon graduating. My senior spring, pretty late in the year, a Tufts alumni emailed me out of the blue, out of nowhere. She had seen my resume on Handshake and was interested not in my environmental studies degree, but rather my Tufts Senate Allocations Board experience. And 2 weeks after graduation, I started working for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the Executive Office for Administration and Finance as a budget analyst. I was one of 12 analysts in that role that was on a team managing a budget for the state of Massachusetts. This was a really big departure from my grand vision of starting a role in the world of environmental affairs, because I had expected that that would be my next step in the process. And I also had never thought of myself as a math person. But nonetheless, I spent an incredible 4 years there as an analyst and as an assistant budget director, during which I got a chance to work on the budget for energy and environmental affairs, as well as on education topics, including school finance reform in the state and on Mass Health, state's Medicaid program. After 4 years there, because of the relationships I had established with the Energy and Environmental Affairs finance team members, the Executive Office of EEA created a policy coordination and strategy role for me that I hopped into and spent the next three years in on the environmental policy side. Through that portion of my career, I worked to help subject matter experts across all of the EEA agencies navigate all of the systems of government to get their work done. So in my current job, which I only started about 8 or 9 months ago now, I'm the CFO at EEA, in which I've been able to marry the 2 halves of my career together into one role, the budget side of the world and the policy side of the world, in which I get to bring that all together to manage the budget, which I'm going to talk to today. Through this, I really never thought that budgeting would so quickly lead to my dream role. And so in terms of a couple pieces of advice through my career journey, I encourage all of you to stay open-minded about your first job. Don't necessarily think about it, but it's worth thinking about what could come of it. Number 2, I encourage all of you to rely on what you know that you're good at, even if it seems a little bit out of the ordinary compared to others. For me, that was very much demonstrated through all of my involvement in student activities groups on campus and the time I spent organizing and project managing there. And then second to last, if you like what you do and you work hard at it, you will almost certainly find success. And so it will always work out in the end and doors will open. And then finally, rely on the student alumni network, because that was the only reason I ended up where I am today. So with that, wanted to launch into the talk today. So in my role, I oversee the budget for energy and environmental affairs. And after providing some background on state government and on EEA to all of you, today's talk is going to explore EEA's goals, share an overview of funding in the state and at EEA, discuss the importance of the budget in implementing goals, and then talk about the challenges in doing so. So, although it is probably familiar, I'm going to start with a refresher on the structure of Massachusetts government. So Massachusetts is a physically small state, but it's amongst the larger populations, which makes us really densely populated and one of the densest in the country. We also have a pretty big population compared to the rest of New England too. We have the same number of people in Massachusetts as New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maine all combined together. So to serve the volume of people, our government is fit to size. We have the judicial branch, which includes courts and associated committees and branches. We have the legislative branch, which includes the House of Representatives and the Senate. And we have the executive branch. Within the executive branch, there's nearly 30 constitutional officers and independent agencies on one side of the world. That includes the Attorney General and the Treasurer and the Secretary of the Commonwealth. But also within the executive branch, we have the governor's cabinet, or the secretariats that report up through the governor. There are 11 of those secretariats, each of which is led by a secretary that's appointed by the governor and leads its administration and policy making for that area of the subject matter area. You are likely familiar with the secretariats. This includes Health and Human Services, Education, Transportation, Public Safety. This also includes Administration and Finance, which manages the budget, amongst other things, and of course includes Energy and Environmental Affairs. And then of course, of importance as well, there are also several quasi-public or independent authorities too, which are typically established in statute with a clear and separate funding source that often serve as policy-making partners to the executive branch. This includes entities like the MBTA, and in the world of energy and environmental affairs, this includes the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, which you may have heard of as well. So EEA's mission statement seeks to protect, preserve, and enhance the Commonwealth's environmental resources while ensuring a clean energy future for the state's residents. The executive office was established in 1975 and will energy and environment together. And today, EEA has over 3,000 full-time employees across the executive office and 6 agencies working to advance this mission. Within the executive office, serves as the umbrella across the agencies, and in the executive office, we oversee the policy areas that cross the agencies and work with the agencies to report up on policy topics up through to the governor's office. This includes an environment team with coastal zone management and land conservation and water resources. This includes a climate team working on decarbonization and resilience. This includes an environmental justice and equity team. And this includes teams for energy, energy transition, and federal and regional energy affairs as well. And then finally, the executive office also includes the Massachusetts Environmental Police, which is another component of the office. And then the agencies are listed below here, all of which you're also probably familiar with. DEP, Environmental Protection, seeks to protect natural resources, so air, water, and land. Conservation and Recreation manages parks and recreational opportunities in the state, including rinks and pools and campgrounds, as well as some natural resource protection as well. Agriculture oversees the agricultural economy, ensures a safe and secure food system, manages animal health, and then crop and pest safety. And then Fish and Game oversees marine fisheries, inland fisheries and wildlife, ecological restoration, and then fishing and boating access. Energy Resources oversees energy resources in the Commonwealth, including towards our clean energy transition, and Public Utility oversees public utilities in our Commonwealth, including investor-owned electric power, natural gas, and water companies, and in addition to transportation network companies like the ride-sharing companies. And then, as mentioned, the Secretary of EEA also serves as the chair of 2 quasi-governmental entities that work to advance our goals as well, which include the Water Resources Authority and then the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And then at EEA, I serve as the CFO, and in my role, I manage the budget for the executive office proper, and then I help oversee the budget for the other agencies at EEA. So at EEA, we have a lot of goals that are driving our progress, and by extension, are defining how we want to spend our resources in the state. Given the variety of the agencies within EEA, I think it's very important for everyone to understand what we're working towards and the strategic plans that guide the goals in front of us. Number 1, EEA is working to protect, preserve, and enhance the Commonwealth's environmental resources. This includes a lot of work. EEA is ensuring that the agencies are serving the public per their mission statements. This is environmental protection through enforcement of laws and regulation and permitting for clean air, water, and land. This is ensuring public safety through the environmental police. This is increasing food security. This is providing recreational opportunities through the parks, rinks, and pools, amongst other things. This is implementing the Farmland Action Plan to promote agricultural resources and the economy. And this is advancing the Resilient Lands Initiative in order to reach some of our land conservation efforts. In the world of decarbonization, the Commonwealth is working to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. EEA has clean energy and climate plans that highlight a suite of specific goals, strategies, policies, actions to reduce emissions accordingly and help us transition to clean energy. In the world of resilience, in 2023, the Commonwealth released a resilient mass plan that aims to ensure the Commonwealth is prepared to withstand and recover and adapt from natural hazard events that are to come with an increased impacts of climate change. And then also in the world of climate resilience, the Commonwealth is working on the Resilient Coasts Initiative that's seeking to develop a statewide strategy for coastal resilience, given the amount of coastline that we actually have. Last, in the world of energy and environmental justice and equity, earlier this year, the Environmental Justice, or EJ strategy released, which is a roadmap that will embed environmental justice and equity into the work that all of the agencies are doing when planning and implementing policies and programs from here on out. These are really important goals for our state. Massachusetts is a leader in a lot of these spheres and has an opportunity to prove to the rest of the world that it's possible to accomplish these things. But implementing these goals costs money. So that leads us to the next slide, talking about where this money actually comes from. So the Commonwealth's funding is managed by the Executive Office for Administration and Finance, which includes agencies like the Department of Revenue. Revenues are coming into the state through roughly 4 different sources. The first is that the state collects tax revenue and non-tax revenue to the tune of about $60 billion a year. Tax revenue is pretty self-explanatory: corporate, personal income, sales and use taxes. Non-tax revenue includes things like departmental revenue. So for example, when you go to register your boat, the fee that you pay counts as departmental revenue. Or when you visit a state park and you pay to park, that also counts as departmental revenue. This also includes federal reimbursements. Federal reimbursements mostly come from a lot of the spending in the world of health and human services that occur. These revenues are mostly deposited into several funds, the largest of which is the general fund and is used to afford the annual operating budget. The operating budget is the budget that gets the most attention, largely because it's the primary mechanism by which government runs. This pays for all the day-to-day of government, including people and contractors and consultants doing the planning and preparation, human services itself, grant programs, information technology, and individual special projects in cities and towns. In addition to this, the Commonwealth also issues long-term debt in the form of bonds, which results in about $3 billion of borrowed funding every year that affords the capital budget. That is used for purchasing long-term assets and infrastructure. In addition to that, the Commonwealth receives federal stimulus funding and federal grants. So in terms of stimulus funding, back in 2021, the federal government passed the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And in Massachusetts, the state received several $billion in one-time funding to be spent through 2026 to stimulate the economy here. And then in addition to that, agencies also apply to federal grant programs and or receive federal grant money. This includes formula grants that are calculated and distributed to agencies based on a set formula at the federal government, and then also includes discretionary, in which agencies competitively apply to grants at the federal level. When federal bills like the IIJA and or the Inflation Reduction Act pass, many of those supercharge the federal programs to create bigger pots of money to which state entities like EA agencies could apply to and receive. Finally, the last big source of revenue is the other category, into which many Commonwealth settlements or donations or grants or special legislation deposits funding. Money is deposited into trusts or trust funds, and sample trust funds at EAA include the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Trust Fund, which collects auction proceeds. There's an EEA trust that collects revenues from the sale of the right whale license plates that you see on the street. And there's a lot of location-specific park or beaches trusts that exist too. Both federal and trust budgets either operate on the federal fiscal year or roll across state fiscal years, and so it's really hard to put boundaries on the volume. So it's a little bit of a vaguer thing. So now that we have all this money available to us, we have to get approval to spend it however we want to spend it. Open question for the group. You can just yell things out. Who do you think cares about how the money is spent? Yes. What else? Who else might care? Go ahead. Yep. Yep, exactly. Any other? Yep. Oh, yes, sorry. Oh, good question. So I can't keep track of it. Everyone cares about where the money goes, I guess is really the bottom line. The taxpayers care about where the money goes. The people who provide the funding might care about where the money goes. The administration itself including all of the other agencies, care about where the money goes. Legislators care, and all of the stakeholder groups, the NGOs and the environmental and the energy organizations all care too, and the businesses. So we have to follow a democratic process to make sure that all of those perspectives are accounted for. And so what I have outlined here is the annual budget cycle that articulates exactly how all of those perspectives actually are accounted for. This is following the same process of how a bill becomes a law. But again, this is specific to the annual operating budget through which the general fund is appropriated. So every year in January, the governor files the governor's version of the operating budget. Between February and March, the legislative teams from the House and the Senate, the staff review the budget and understand it and digest it and develop their own versions of the budget. In April, the House Ways and Means analysts, as part of the House Ways and Means Committee, organized the House Ways and Means report, on which then the whole House issues their own version of the budget. Thereafter, the Senate Ways and Means Committee develops a budget that then goes to the full Senate for review and voting as well. In June, a conference committee between the House and the Senate is convened with 3 representatives from each to come together and reconcile differences between the House and the Senate versions of the bill, after which they issue a conference committee report. Then that goes back to the governor, who has 10 days to review that conference committee report, issue vetoes, after which the legislature is given an opportunity to override vetoes, after which the budget becomes final. And so through this whole process, there's all these opportunities for every single one of those people who care about the budget to weigh in and react and offer feedback and input accordingly. And with that, now we have money to spend and we have approval to spend it. So how do we actually spend it at EEA? As I mentioned, the Commonwealth works on an annual fiscal year basis. And each year, EEA agencies spend about $800 million in operating capital funding, on top of which they're spending all of the federal money that I mentioned and the trust money as well. The executive office has a larger budget here because the executive office issues some one-time money or annual blocks of funding to entities like the Clean Water Trust and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, due to the extent to which we partner with those organizations to accomplish some of our goals. Environmental protection has an annual operating budget that's pretty high because they have a big team of people working on compliance and permitting and oversight of environmental laws and regulations. I'm trying to pick out some highlights. Agricultural resources is a big number, in large part because they run a food security grant program and they issue money for emergency food assistance. Conservation and recreation has the biggest budgets at EEA. With their operating budget, with their capital budget, they're implementing long-term upgrades and improvements to all of the infrastructure and facilities across the Commonwealth. That includes campgrounds and parks and beaches and dams and dam safety and parkways, and there's just a lot of this infrastructure, and the parks, of course, as well. And then with their operating budget every year, they are maintaining all of that infrastructure from there on out. Both public and utilities and energy resources numbers here look really small, not because they're not spending very much money, but because most of their money actually lives in the world of federal and trusts. But again, because it's hard to, because these roll across fiscal years, it's really hard to quantify exactly what is happening on a given fiscal year, or to put boundaries around the money on a given fiscal year, although there's plenty of spending planning that is occurring accordingly. So why does all of this matter? And what is the point of all this money that we're talking about? Because money is a very significant factor in accomplishing EEA's goals. Money allows us to buy the goods and the services that allow us to accomplish these goals in and of themselves. So as outlined on the slide here are a bunch of really important snapshots that illustrate what we're buying in service of each of our goals. This includes really important things like from the federal ARPA allocation of $150 million for clean energy, electric vehicle adoption, charging infrastructure, as well as a significant amount for port infrastructure. There's about $20 million a year for general dam safety and seawalls, in addition to another $30 million off to the side for certain special projects in service of increasing climate resilience. There's $8.7 million in the budget every year for implementing the environmental justice strategy to promote and secure environmental justice across all of the agencies. And then in the world of environmental resources as well, there's funding for the Mass Trails program, which is working to increase the network of trails and connectivity around the Commonwealth as well. Land conservation is another really important component of protection of environmental resources as well. This land conservation spending is also benefiting some of our other goals here too, including decarbonizing, in which the Clean Energy and Climate Plan sets some pretty specific goals for land conservation goals into the future too. And so through this, as part of my role, it's really important that when managing these numbers, that I'm thinking big picture to help all of our decision makers understand how to ensure that every single one of these dollars is going to have the greatest impact possible in service of all of these goals. I have to look at all of the numbers that we have on the previous slide and make sure that our work is strategic. I have to make sure that our spending is coordinated across the operating capital, federal and trust budget, and is connected to strategic plans as well. And is working across the agencies. So we want to make sure that the work of environmental protection is in support of the work that the Department of Conservation and Recreation is doing as well. I have to ensure that our spending is effective. I want to make sure that every single dollar that we're spending is being devoted to the best and highest use. And I want to make sure that we're maximizing use of all of the funding that we have available to us every single fiscal year. It's important for me to be efficient in managing of the money too. It needs to be easy for all of the program and project managers that have this money to get that money out the door to accomplish these goals. And then finally, it's important that I am helping make these numbers transparent. I need everyone outside the world of finance to understand the impact that these dollars are having across all of their communities and in service of all of these goals. Accomplishing this is not easy, and there are a lot of factors that make it really, really, really hard to manage the money in service of those goals. Number one is costs. We have to be able to estimate the costs of accomplishing these goals, oftentimes in advance, in order to make a budget ask. In addition to that, we also have to be aware that we're pulling from a finite pool of resources and that we're going to have to really make sure that we communicate clearly and effectively not only what the cost is, but the benefit of that cost. Consensus building, again, because we're drawing from a finite pool of resources, we have to convince a lot of people why our work and the costs are so, so, so important. We have to balance all of the ideas of all of those people who I listed before care about the money, including agencies, the administration, leadership, legislators, administration and finance, who is building the budget amongst all of the other secretariats as well, and all of the stakeholder groups as well. And it's really important because if you don't necessarily have that right balance, you might not make it through that annual budget cycle to receive the authorization to spend the money. Process. Once you estimate your costs and you build consensus along the way, budgeting also requires navigating a lot of process through which many, many things can change along the way. Through this whole process, you really have to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that all of the consensus building you did is compiled and is shared with the rest of the groups. And it has to be navigated strategically because things change throughout the entire process. In addition to that, time makes it challenging to manage the money as well. So once you actually receive authorization to spend the money, it takes time to start spending. You have to hire people to spend the money. You have to design the programs to spend the money, and all of that takes a sizable amount of time to actually stand up the infrastructure to do the spending. And then finally, once everything is actually set up, budgets then have to be implemented in alignment with what was promised. All spending has really different requirements associated with it. And so in order to be strategic and effective and efficient and transparent in management of the money, constantly have to have a different handle on all of the nuances associated with all of the funding sources and all of those requirements to make it through implementation successfully as well. Through implementation, there's a lot of project management required too. Things always change, so you have to be able to react quickly and take action And finally, through all of this, you have to be able to talk about your successes and communicate to the world the outcome of this long process that you went through up until the point of securing funding. If successful in navigating the challenges, there's a lot of opportunity that comes with budget management. It's really, really exciting to be in the centerfold of all of these really important goals and to have responsibility to help navigate the challenge of receiving and then spending that money, getting that money out the door. I think generally speaking, it's a really, really exciting time to be in the sphere of energy and environmental affairs right now because of the public attention on these goals and because of the extent to which the climate crisis is serving as an opportunity for change too. So there's a lot of appetite to implement these goals at this point in time. And I think into the future, really excited, looking forward at what else is to come to continue the strategic, effective, efficient, and transparent management of the funding in and of itself. So as a recap, as I mentioned before, when I was at Tufts, I really did like all of the subject matter content that I was working on, and I certainly could not decide on any one area that interested me the most. And I also, at that time, had no idea how my project management and relationship management and organizational management interests would translate to the real world. So even though the role that I have ended up in is a little bit outside the scope of a traditional career path in environmental affairs, the opportunity to manage the budget in service of all of those goals is one that's really impactful and meaningful. I, in my role all day, every day, get to work with all of the subject matter experts that are coming up with the ideas as to the best way to accomplish all of these goals. And I get to work with them and work with the agency finance team to translate all of these ideas into action and actually implement them so that you can see the real, true, measured impact in the numbers that come down the line. And that is about it. I'm happy to open it up to questions from here on out. I'm a little bit quick.
Thank you so much, Caroline. While people gather their thoughts, I'll get us started. And I have a question about consensus building. I was wondering two things. First, what does that actually look like within your unit in the different agencies? Is there a sense of we're all together in this among the different departments, or is it more like the Hunger Games where everybody tries to get what they need? And the second part of that question is, how has your psychology major informed all this consensus building?
Absolutely. So consensus building is definitely an interesting thing because I think everyone out there knows that there's a finite pool of resources and everyone wants a slice of that pie because everyone believes that their work is very, very, very important. So in the world of consensus building, there's a lot of relationship management that has to occur. You have to build trust with the agency. So that means that you have to listen, you have to ask really, really good questions to understand what the agencies are trying to accomplish. And you have to get into the weeds of the policy oftentimes too, to make sure that the ideas are fully fleshed out and well thought through, including all of the potential ways that that policy could go wrong or could take a left-hand turn. And once you understand the concepts that are in hand, you also have to work to make sure that these concepts are implementable so that there's a way to put them into action if the money were to appear. For example, is the individual or entity interested in hiring a consultant to do the work who's going to write a plan or a strategy or a draft? Is that person interested in running a grant program? And what does the grant program design look like? And are they ready, if given the money, to hand it out to the public organizations in accordance with public organization applications as a result of all of that? Once you get this idea and you make sure that's a good idea, there's a big process that comes of socializing that idea with everyone who could possibly care about that idea. That often happens at the agency level as well as at the executive office or secretariat level too. This includes originally, maybe even in the first place, building the idea through stakeholder meetings with organizations that either independently had the idea or would have a stake in whatever that idea is. and includes conversations with legislators who have a strong handle on their constituents and understand what their constituents are interested in accomplishing as well. And that work is very, very iterative between the agencies and the executive office and the governor's office through the whole process of policy development as a whole. Through that, it's not always a yes, even if you have all of these conversations. You don't always get to an immediate yes. There's a lot of compromise that comes with a lot of these conversations. There are a lot of changes and amendments that come too. And sometimes it's not even easy to get it across the finish line, even if people agree with a lot of the components, given other forces at will. So this consensus building takes a long time and takes a lot of patience and really requires I don't know, collaboration and listening and building trust with all of the people who have these ideas. My social psychology degree honestly is one that I draw upon regularly in my role. I'm really interested in the concept of how people think and how people work and the patterns associated with how people think and how people work. And I often think back to my degree here because some of those patterns have resulted in a lot of success in getting things done. So, for example, you can't just drop an idea on someone and expect someone to buy into it. They need time to think about it. They need to understand it. They need to know how it might affect them along the way. And having learned that in my degree, I was easily able to take that approach when I started, for example, in the budget office. Working in money often also means you have to say no because there isn't an unlimited amount of resources that can go around. And so similarly to not being able to drop an idea on someone, you can't just say no to someone either. You have to help them understand why it's a no. They need to understand who else is affected by whatever the idea is. They need to understand that whatever the limitations are in order to trust you and to trust that that you're committed to working with them and committed to figuring it out with them in partnership. So in short, in summary, I draw upon my psychology degree quite regularly, even though I'm not necessarily formally applying that portion of my degree in my current role.
Valuable advice for all kind of aspects of life.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question regarding the funding. I guess before getting the fund, what are the kind of like tools for risk assessment, or like what should someone who's just like inquiring about funding know if he or she had like, or they have the high chances to get the fund or not, whether get the fund or not, and whether it's like a project management secret, or like can anyone, like there are some tools that just like we can actually like more specific to environmental like risks assessment and what the funding agencies are looking for actually. Thank you.
That is a great question. It's one that I dealt with a lot during my time working in administration and finance. People like to ask for money. It's fun to ask for money, and money is shiny and bright object that has the power to accomplish a lot of really great things. But because there's not enough money to go around, the initiatives and the ideas that often have the most success upfront are the ones that come to decision makers already having completed the analysis, the planning, the concepts, as well as all of that consensus building with everyone who could possibly care about some of these ideas. I think actually even backing up further, of course, the administration and leadership certainly needs to be comfortable with whatever idea it is that is being proposed upfront before you can initiate all of that work. But it's this important effort of confirming that there may be political appetite or interest in it, after which agencies, teams, staff member really are able to build the package from the ground up. Things that are packaged that really think through the whole problem, think through the whole execution of the problem, and think through All of the ways that the problem statement could go awry into the future are often the ones that have the most success in making their way through the budget process, because they have thought through all of the questions or concerns that anyone might raise throughout that democratic annual budget cycle process.
I'm curious. So you're talking about one of the most important steps in like budgeting is the time management, and this whole cycle seems to be a year ending on the fiscal year. I'm guessing July, where you get that final budget.
Yeah.
While you're thinking about how you're allocating those funds, a year is a pretty short time. Thinking about long-term goals, are you thinking about year to year and making projections about what you may get in the future and the next year and the next year, and making plans with that while you're going through this process while still working with the current budget that you have?
Yes, that is a great question. And I'm actually going to go back to, let's go there. Oops. Ask it, but I'll forget it. I was going to go back to the slide with all of the funding sources that existed. The operating budget is managed on an annual fiscal year basis. However, the capital budget, for which Energy and Environmental Affairs actually has a sizable amount of money, is managed on a 5-year basis. And so, yep, thank you. So as evidence here, even though EEA is a smaller sliver, about 1% of the operating budget, we're actually 10% of the statewide capital budget, and the funding amount is pretty comparable to the amount we get from the operating budget. So much of the work that we're doing, especially in the world of climate resilience, for example, in which we're working to reinforce the infrastructure that we have against the future impacts of climate change, we're thinking about that on a 5-year plan. So we're focused on the next year, but we're mapping out the potential costs of implementing change over years 2, 3, 4, 5 as well. The capital plan itself is updated every single year on a rolling 5-year basis. So there's an opportunity every year to make sure that the dollars are being allocated to their best and highest use and service of the goals. But there's also a longer range plan that's in place in order to see that through. On the operating budget side, as to get to your point too, a year is pretty quick. It happens very, very, very fast. All of the agencies are managing this in different ways. Within the executive office this year, in building our spending plans, we actually worked with all of the teams to ask them what their plans were for years 2 and 3 as well and beyond, because we were interested in understanding exactly their vision for the future thereafter. Because of how quick this budget cycle is too, pretty much as soon as the final budget is finalized in July or shortly thereafter, you have about a couple months to develop a spending plan for that year, after which you immediately start planning the budget for the next year. And so in thinking about these big picture goals, one of the benefits of a cycle that works this way is that you're constantly thinking both about the present and the future at the same time through every step of the process. You're ping-ponging between your fiscal years every other day throughout this whole process. So you're always thinking ahead to what the future goals are and how your current fiscal year spending is going to influence what you're asking for in the next year. That's a good question.
My question is about, in your role now, do you find yourself engaging with other agencies, offices outside the EEA? And if so, what do those interactions look like? I would imagine that there is some overlap between like what different offices are working on. Yeah.
That's a great question too. So in this administration established a new climate office that's responsible for thinking about implementation of decarbonization and climate resilience across the whole of government to make sure that all 11 of those secretariats are working towards the same goals and aren't working in conflict with each other. For example, housing and land conservation and economic development as sample policy areas that need to be rowing in the same direction. Energy and environmental affairs includes climate teams that are doing a lot of the science-related work to support the initiatives that the climate office is thinking about across the whole of government. And so we're working really, really closely with the climate office often to understand what it looks like to partner with other secretariats to make sure that the work gets done. Another thing that's happening as part of this is that the budget office is very much thinking about basically like what it means to consider environmental justice and to consider climate in budgeting processes across the whole of government and so we're also working with them and supporting them in answering some of those hard questions. And then I would say largely on the issue specific basis, there's constantly conversations between certain secretariats and the on policy areas that affect multiple secretaries at once. It's this kind of complicated web, spider web of lines crossing between everyone all over the place, because as you all know, as environmental studies majors, everything is connected to everything. And so that's a huge, huge challenge of this role and is, as I mentioned, in the scheme of all of the people that care about the money, all of those other secretariats are part of the equation too.
Thank you, Carolyn, for a wonderful talk. I'm struck, I'll make an observation and then I have a question. The observation is you have an amazing alignment between the energy and the environmental protection, which I don't think is often. I often hear when energy and environment get pulled together, they fight tooth and nail because their interests are not always aligned. So I know my question, I guess, is to what extent are you looking for examples outside the state to inform how you have productive conversations in the state? In what degree do you collaborate, like in the Northeast region, through like RGGI goals and things like that, or is your work highly, state specific?
It's a great question too. I'm thinking about the best way to answer it. I think that one of the benefits of the structure of EEA is that the subject matter experts for both the environment and energy are sitting in the same room. They're sitting in the same place. And so before an idea can get very far, those two people, those two teams, those two areas have to interact with each other. And internally, you have to make sure that we're all on the same page before we take our idea elsewhere out there to the world. And so simply by merging energy and environment together, I think you really handle a lot of the coordination that comes with that. I think one of the best examples of that maybe even is in the world of RGGI too, in that both environmental protection, the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Energy Resources have funding sources, both RGGI and this DEP Climate Trust, that collect auction proceeds associated with reduction in carbon emissions. We'll keep it at that. And these are both really big pots of funding that have a similar shared goal of being applied towards decarbonization projects, climate mitigation projects, emissions reduction projects, and also projects that can help us withstand or adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so when you have two big areas of funding that are out there, it's really important that they're rowing in the same direction and they're coordinated together. And so as part of my role, and with the benefit of having both of these agencies within the same portfolio, it's easy to bring people together to have those conversations about the strategic direction of the collective amount as a whole in order to accomplish goals. What was the other part of your question? I think maybe we'll cover it. Oh. Yeah, that is another big piece. Also in this administration, there is a new federal and regional energy affairs office that was established within EEA, which is charged, as you can probably tell, with coordinating with other states. That's definitely focused on regional energy issues that affect all of New England, for example. But I think simply because of the leadership that exists within EEA and the fact that that leadership is in partnership, is I don't know, housed in the same place as the environmental teams, makes it really easy to speak the same language. Yeah.
I find your story really inspiring, especially that you came to this financial position with a background as an environmental studies major and not as an economics or finance major. And I'm curious about that process and what like drew you to work on the tough Senate budget in the first place. And how did you familiarize yourself with financial and economic systems without studying economics? And then just like onto that, like how do you work differently from your colleagues who may have studied economics? And there are a lot of ways to impact environmental policy. Like, why do you love impacting it through the budget?
Yeah, absolutely. When my former supervisor, Tufts alumni, reached out about the administration and finance fiscal policy analyst role, I was really, really hesitant. Really hesitant. I, again, had never considered myself to be a math person or a numbers person. But what intrigued me about that opportunity was that it was made clear it wasn't just about the numbers, it was also about understanding like the legal background associated with getting money out the door. Someone has to write the law, someone has to write the legislation, someone has to come up with a proposal that gets approved. And then another big piece of it too was communications. And so you may be really good at the numbers, you may be really good at the analytical legal components of it, but you also have to be able to put those two things together and convince decision makers why it's the best idea possible and sell them on it. And you also need to convince all of the people who may not buy into the idea based on the concepts of it, why they should have confidence in whatever it is that someone came up with. And so on the team of the 12 analysts, everyone certainly found their own niche based on which of those kind of three things the people were best at. I certainly leaned a little bit more heavier on the communication and taking really complex topics and being able to boil them down for leadership to make decisions versus some of the rest of this stuff. When I was at Tufts, though, I really enjoyed my time on the Senate, working on a bunch of different areas in and across campus. And through that, I was really interested in allocations board in particular because it gave a window into the work that all the student groups were doing on campus. So it was interesting to see the flyers and to read about the headlines in the Tufts Daily, but the money follows the policy and the policy follows the money. And so it was a very cool position to be in, to be able to have student groups present to the allocations board and make their case for why their request for a portion of the student activities fee was the best use of that funding for the benefit of the whole student body. And so it was that piece of it that I found really interesting, not the Excel piece. So yeah, when I made my way to the budget office, I certainly like leaned on this concept of being able to I don't know, be in the room when decisions are being made and to be able to play a role in advocating for policy areas that I found interesting to decision makers to convince them of the benefit of that outcome. There was no guarantee that I was going to work on energy and environmental affairs when I was brought into that role, but luckily the account assignments worked out that I was immediately able to start working on the energy and environmental affairs budgets. And in that role, I was meeting with the CFOs and the finance teams of all of the energy and environmental affairs agencies to take that approach, to understand, what are you proposing? Why is this important? Help me understand the details of this. Doing some simple math, understanding trends over time. For example, I see you only spent this much last year. Why do you need this much more this year? Help me understand what this change is and show me your buildup. Show me how you got there. Yeah, and then being able to take all of that and present it to leadership, to the governor, to the secretary for administration and finance to convince them to get stuff done. So it's a little bit of an unusual, it was a very unusual path versus what I was expecting, having, I don't know, carried my way through senior spring as a day one environmental studies major. But being able to work at that 10,000 foot view and use that opportunity to understand how the whole system works brought me to where I am now. It's my understanding of how the system works and how to get an idea all the way through all of the components of the system to implementation that makes me so excited about my job.
Yeah, so this question's from the chat. It says, what has been the most surprising part of your job?
Great question. What is the most surprising? I think honestly, one of the most surprising things about my job is how hard it is to actually spend the money. You would think that when you have money allocated for projects or programs that you could immediately start spending, you could immediately get the money out the door and start to accomplish really, really, really great things. But there is definitely a lot of process involved with spending the money. After the budget is passed in July, there is this several-month process in which agencies, the agency finance teams have to figure out how to actually distribute all of the resources that they've got into whatever projects are occurring that year. So there's a lot of decision-making that occurs even after the budget is set to decide exactly who gets what in order to accomplish goals. So for example, someone might have an idea of $200,000 for a consultant project, and another person might have an idea for $200,000 for a consultant project, but there's a second decision-making process about everything that's changed since the idea first arose about who actually is going to get $200,000 for their consultant project, or if the money should be shifted between the two. And then once spending is then fully programmed through the spending plan process after the budget is set, in order to issue money, you have to follow state procurement law, which means that everyone has to have like a fair and competitive opportunity to bid on whatever money that you're trying to spend or apply to receive whatever money you're trying to spend. And that takes a big amount of time too, a couple months. So at that point in time, even if you were pretty much ready to go the second that the budget passed, you probably aren't going to be able to start spending until, I don't know, a third of the way into the fiscal year. So you really have to constantly be thinking ahead about all the steps that are required if you're actually going to be able to get all the money that you're budgeted out the door in usually most times one fiscal year across the board. I think that was the most surprising thing is truly recognizing how hard it is to get money out the door. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi. So I was wondering, as the climate financing space continues to grow in the private sector through agreements and partnerships, how that's changing how you're operating on the public side.
That is another really good question. I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities into the future for the concept of like public-private partnerships in the world of climate finance. There's the concept of like a green bank is one that's pretty popular in multiple states. And I think the success of affording the climate, the transition to clean energy and whatnot is like reliant upon a partnership between the state and private entities as well. One of the quasi-public entities, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, is thinking a lot about that world. They're not a state agency, but rather off to the side and with a separate funding source, and are responsible for thinking about like what workforce development looks like and what innovation looks like and how to actually, I don't know, support the world, the private world in structuring themselves to be able to best meet the state's goals and best align with the state's strategies and policies and requirements like getting to net zero by 2050. So in short, it's going to require a lot of partnership into the future.
I'm sure she would love to talk to other students who have more questions. And in fact, she has told me one of the things she loves doing the most is giving informational interviews. So she has given us permission to reach out to her in case you want to learn more about what she does. And let's give her one big round of applause.